A while back, I tried to copy someone else's life. Not literally, just their routine. They were one of those creators who seem to have figured out everything. Wake up at 5 a.m., work out before sunrise, deep work while everyone else was still asleep. The way they talk about it made it sound so simple. So, I opened my notes app, wrote down the schedule almost line for line, set my alarm, and told myself this was finally going to be the routine that stuck. For 4 days, it actually felt promising. But day 5 happened. Nothing dramatic. I was just tired. Something came up that morning, and so my schedule flipped. One missed block turned into 2. And within a week, the whole thing was just gone. At first, I treated it like evidence. Evidence that I wasn't disciplined enough. Evidence that I wanted results, but not the work. Evidence that there was something wrong with me that wasn't wrong with the people the advice seemed to work for. But the more I look into it, the less sense that explanation made. Because it wasn't just one routine, it was productivity systems, study plans, morning habits, self-improvement advice in general. Every time something didn't work, I assumed the problem was me, until I started asking a different question. What if the advice wasn't failing because I was doing it wrong? What if it was failing because it was written for someone living a completely different life than me? I remember the morning it finally clicked. Day 5 of the routine, the alarm went off at 5 a.m. I got up, half awake, and for a few minutes it felt like things were going according to plan. This was the version of me I imagined when I started. The person who gets up early, the person who finally has their life together. Then the morning happened. Not dramatically, nothing went wrong, just real life. Something needed my attention before I'd even made it to my desk. And so one thing led to another. The quiet block of time I had planned my entire morning around slowly disappeared. And I remember sitting there afterward feeling strangely frustrated. Not because I'd failed, not at all, because I hadn't. I had done exactly what the advice said to do. I set the alarm, I've gotten out of bed, I'd shown up. And somehow, the routine still wasn't working the way it was supposed to. That was the part I couldn't stop thinking about. Because the creator, whose routine I copied, wasn't doing anything wrong either. Their routine probably worked exactly as advertised. But the more I thought of it, the more I realized we weren't starting from the same place. Their mornings looked different. Their environment looked different. In fact, their day was built differently. The advice itself wasn't bad. It was built on assumptions I couldn't see. Assumptions about time, about stability, about control over your environment. And once I noticed that, I started seeing it everywhere. A lot of self-improvement advice is presented like it's universal. Follow these steps, get these results. But every piece of advice is written from somewhere. Somebody's life, someone's circumstances, someone's starting point. And what it hadn't occurred to me before was that maybe the problem wasn't that I couldn't follow the advice. Maybe the advice was never written in my situation to begin with. Once I noticed it, I started seeing it everywhere. I'd watch productivity videos and catch myself paying attention to things I never really thought about before. Not the routine itself, but the conditions around it. The quiet apartment, the uninterrupted mornings, the fact that the creator could decide what happened in the first few hours of their day, and most of the day, that's what happened. This wasn't my reality, and so the more I watched these videos, the more I realized a lot of the advice I admired had something in common. It wasn't really designed to help someone build a foundation. It assumed the foundation already existed. The advice was about optimization. How to wake up earlier, how to focus longer, how to structure your day more effectively. In fact, how to squeeze a little more performance out of a system that was already working. But it wasn't trying to optimize anything. I was still trying to build something stable in the first place. Still figuring out where the time was going. Still trying to create space for the things I care about. Still trying to make consistency possible before I worried about making it efficient. And once I saw that, a lot of my frustration started to make sense. Because I spent years assuming the advice wasn't working because there was something wrong with me. What if the advice wasn't failing? What if it wasn't written for the stage I was in? Here's the part that actually stayed with me the longest. When something works for someone else and keeps falling apart for you, a story starts forming in the background. Not all at once, just a little more every time. A routine that lasts 2 weeks and disappears, a happy tracker that ends halfway through the month, a system you were convinced would finally be the one. I had a collection of those, and after a while, I stopped seeing them as separate attempts. I started seeing them as evidence about what I was capable of, evidence about how serious I really was, evidence that maybe I liked the idea of changing more than the reality of it. The strange thing is that none of these thoughts felt dramatic at the time. They felt reasonable. The routines had collapsed, the habits had stopped, the results that were supposed to come never showed up. So the conclusion seemed obvious. The advice worked, but I didn't. I carried that explanation for longer than I'd like to admit. Because if you never question the advice itself, there's only one place left to look: yourself. But once I started paying attention to those routines we're actually asking for, that is the time, the environment, the stability underneath them, something stopped making sense. The problem wasn't that I wasn't trying, not at all. The problem was that I kept treating someone else's starting points as if it were my own. And those are two very different things. After that, I started looking at the advice differently. Not whether it was good, whether it matched the situation I was actually in. In fact, I remember watching another productivity video a few weeks later. Normally, I could have paused it every few minutes to take notes. But this time around, I found myself paying attention to different things. Not the routine, but the conditions around the routine. The quiet workplace, the uninterrupted schedule, the fact that the creator could block out 2 or more hours for deep work and reasonably expect those 2 hours to still belong to them. And instead of asking, how can I copy this? I started asking something else. What survives if my day doesn't go according to plan? Because that's the version I was actually living, not the ideal day, the normal one. The day where something runs late, the day where the quiet hour becomes 20 minutes, the day where plan gets interrupted before it really starts. And strangely enough, once I started thinking that way, the advice became more useful. Not because I followed it exactly, but because I translated it. A 2-hour study block became 30 minutes. A perfect routine became one habit I could keep even if the morning fell apart. And so the goal stopped being to recreate someone else's system, but the goal became finding the smallest version that still worked. And I started to think that that's the part most advice leaves out. Not the routine itself, but the translation step. The part where you take an idea that worked in someone else's life and figure out what it means inside of your own. Because until that, you're not really following advice. You're just borrowing solutions to problems that might not be the ones you're actually dealing with. Now, if you've tried the advice and it hasn't worked, if you've built the routines and watched them fall apart, if you yourself have carried that explanation for longer than you would like to admit, the one that states the advice worked and you didn't, I want to say something directly. You're probably not the problem. You're probably applying advice that was designed for a different stage. The person who wrote it had something you're still working towards. That time that belonged to them. A quiet enough to thinking, enough stability that a bad week didn't unravel everything else. And they didn't mention any of that because to them it was invisible. It was just the water they swam in. They never had to build from nothing. So it never occurred to them to name it. I spent a long time thinking the distance between me and the people the advice was written for was discipline. But it actually wasn't. It was circumstances, and circumstances can change. They're not permanent. They're not a verdict on what you're capable of, but they are real right now. And pretending they aren't doesn't just make the advice work. It just makes every failure feel more personal than it deserves to be. So the next time a routine collapses, before you reach that explanation, before you decide it says something about who you are, ask a different question first. What was this advice actually assuming? And what's the smallest version of it that could actually survive my life as it is right now? That version exists. It's just smaller and less impressive than the one in the video. But it's yours, and it's the one that holds. But here's something that I kept running into after I understood all of this. I asked the right questions, I'd find the smaller versions, I'd start, and for a while, it would work, actually. But then something in the middle, without any obvious reasons, it could just quietly stop. No dramatic failure, no single moment where I decided to quit. I just look up one day and realized I haven't done the right thing in 2 weeks. And I had no idea where exactly I would stop. Why does that happen? And is there a way to catch it before it does? Well, that's what this next video is going to be about.